Hi, this is Amy Ippoliti, and I'm with Seattle Yoga News. I started practicing yoga when I was 16, and I went with my mom to a class, and so that's a lot of years I've been practicing. And yeah, I think at that age I was in my adolescence and really didn't know who I was, and was struggling with like the popular girls at school. And so it felt like this oasis to come and just discover who I was, independent of outside expectations and pressure from girls. And so I was drawn to it like a magnet. I just wanted to be in that space of learning who I was through yoga, and it was through asana. And I was very much a body person, very athletic, very into gymnastics and that kind of thing. But I felt that there was something much bigger going on than just the physicality of it, and I was very drawn to that. I mean, I would say that the turning point really was the very first night of my teacher training, of the very first teacher training I ever took. I was 26, 27, and I had signed up for the teacher training only to go deeper in my practice. So I was having done yoga at that point 11 years. And I thought, you have to be in your 40s to be a yoga teacher, at least, if not older. And I had this impression that you really needed to just be this wise woman or wise man to be able to impart yoga. And so I thought, well, I've only been doing it 11 years. So things have changed a lot since then, but that was my perception back then. And so I really just signed up for the teacher training as a way to understand the philosophy more and maybe understand how the body aligned and all these things, and the breath and pranayama and meditation. Like I wanted to learn more than just what I was learning in the 90-minute classes I was going to. And so that night I just showed up and thought, I'm just doing this, to go deeper and whatever. And so I wanted to let my teacher know that that was my intention. So I went up to her and I said, I just want you to know that this is really for me to go deeper. I don't want to teach. And she looked at me and she was like rolled her eyes, and she's like, you are going to teach. And her strong belief in me was like such a shock that she even felt I could teach, that belief in myself coming from someone else enabled me to go, oh wow. It opened up a whole world. Like, really? I could do this? And then I knew I knew in every cell of my body that I was gonna teach yoga. And I'm a natural teacher. I've always taught. Even before yoga, I was teaching things. So I knew without a shadow of a doubt I would be teaching. Because of the studies I've done in yoga, and they're so vast. I mean, you're never done studying yoga. It's just an endless process. And you hope that you start really young because there's so much to learn. It's so infinite. And I think sometimes in the 21st century, it's really difficult to look at these ancient teachings and say, like, how the hell does this apply to my life? How does it, how is it even relevant to me? And there's ways in which it's relevant and ways in which it's not. There are very ancient schools of yoga, and there's actually more modern ones that were in the last, few centuries that you can actually really apply, and there's much more relevance to your life. And so I'm interested in those teachings. They're more of the tantric teachings, which I find more relevant to 21st century. They actually support 21st century living much more than older schools of yoga that unfortunately most of hatha yoga or asana based systems are going with the really ancient ones, less modern ones. So I'm more in the modern zone, but that might be too much information that you asked for. But anyway, what's interesting to me is to not look at those teachings and have it be this abstract thing that you learn because you're supposed to, but you go, how does this actually make me more skillful in the 21st century? And how does it apply to me in the 21st century so that it's relevant to my life and I can live skillfully. So I'm very interested in how the yoga teachings make us live more skillfully, whether that's you're more kind to people around you, you deal with stress more easily, you deal with loss and pain and suffering in a more skillful manner, where you bounce back quicker from devastation. You can make sense of the fact that we're in this natural world that really is like we're not in charge, you know, and to have that humility of like we're not in charge, and no, we're not the ones that are going to destroy this planet, because we're going to destroy ourselves before we destroy the planet. So it's sort of like looking at how all these teachings can make us live in a more interconnected, conscious way on Earth, because we're really at a tipping point right now with the environment. And if yoga teachings can help us to become more conscious, to wake up, to show up, and be more vibrant in the world, let's bring it on. And so to me, you know, if the yoga class can be much more than just, oh, look, I can put my leg behind my head, I'm really game for that. So we started 90 Monkeys a few years ago as a way of bridging the gap for yoga teachers between when they graduate from their teacher training and they enter the real world. So there's so many things either their teacher training didn't cover, whether that was, you know, and it depends what teacher training it was. Like they might not have felt they had enough anatomy, for example. They may have felt like they didn't get enough of the kind of, you know, career coaching that they needed to sort of earn a living as a yoga teacher, or even to just, you know, give their students, you know, I call it customer service, even though that's more of a corporate word. It's sort of like, you know, how do you serve your students, not just in the yoga room, but like, you know, they're paying you money. And so on a business side of things, to help bridge the gap in there, a lot of trainings don't have that kind of module in their training. And then we also have philosophy. Maybe there was a lack of philosophy, so we have that. So we have all the little gaps. Whatever you need, we have online courses for. And then we have live events. We have a school of training, so we also have a 200 and a 300 hour, so a 500 hour program for teachers that's in-house in the studio as well. So when I was younger, you know, I was actually, the very first few years of practice, I was stiff, and I found that yoga made me tighter. And I found that when I started learning alignment-based yoga, that then I started to open up a lot more. So I felt like I was straining my muscles in such a way that they were getting tighter. But as soon as I learned alignment and how to stack the body, I opened up dramatically up and through my 30s, and even at, you know, up until I was 40. And now, as I've kind of go into the next chapter of my 40s, I've found that my body's definitely changing. So I find that my practices are much more therapeutically based. They're not as, you know, full on active. I no longer stand on my head, for example, because of the neck, things like that. And it used to be my favorite pose, was like tick-tocking and rocking around my head in circles. And so it's like, you know, it's letting that stuff go and going like, how can I feel the best in my body is really how my practice has changed. Like, what do I need to do on the mat to make myself feel really good? You know, and that's my priority. It's not about, you know, the forms that my body takes as much anymore. So it's shifted in the last year or so, really, but quite dramatically. And I'm accepting that. You know, putting a number on your age, you know, can create like funny belief systems like, oh, I'm in my 30s, I should be able to be at the prime of my yoga practice. I actually do think that the 30s are your prime for yoga. Late 30s, actually, because you have enough wisdom and understanding, your body is just open. But I think that, you know, it's like it could create too much of a mind trip, like, oh, I'm in my 40s, oh, I'm in my 50s, you know, this is what I should be able to do. I think every body is different and everyone ages differently. So more important, I think, is to recognize that despite some of the culture, maybe you could say like the the pop culture of yoga, which is Instagram and some of the festivals. It's a very young, youthful crowd, and it's certainly a reality of our culture. But what's so funny about that is that is actually the minority in the larger scope of who's doing yoga in the United States, for example. You've got, people in their 50s and 60s with back issues and shoulder problems and neck stuff, and they're dealing with, cancer, rehab and all sorts of things, or degenerative diseases, and they're coming to yoga in the thousands. They're just pouring into yoga because their doctor said this is something that would help your stress levels, etc. That is the majority of who's doing yoga in this country. But it's the unseen. It's not as hip and like, look what's happening. And, so yoga teachers would be wise to get educated in how do you help special populations practice this art form, because that is who's really doing yoga. Like, sure, the young culture is, all the media is around that. It's not around the masses of people that are coming to yoga with therapeutic issues and special population problems. So yoga teachers get trained in how to help those folks, because otherwise, you're pretty much going to be like only teaching this small minority, and then that's why the yoga teachers also will get like, there's too many yoga teachers, there's too many yoga studios, because you're all fighting over the same young, youthful, bendy types, when there's this whole population that is so much bigger. I mean, it's like like that. So anyway, don't get me started. Yoga, when I started, was this very mystical thing, and it was like done in people's living rooms with like orange shag carpets and incense going. It's sort of like the impression of how yoga was when I started. And when I started, also they like had just started to make it more sort of like trendy in New York and stylish to do it, and they were doing it in fitness studios, and it sort of evolved to there in the 80s for me. And then of course it became insanely popular in the mid-90s, when it was discovered that Madonna and Willem Dafoe and whatnot are doing yoga, and that's when I actually went from having to ask my boyfriend to pay for my yoga books to like being so booked I was saying no to jobs. And I guess at that point the practice was quite traditional, and the teachers that were sort of in the know and had the knowledge to impart had been to India. They had been to sort of the original teachers of that day, and were imparting that stuff to people like me, who were young teachers, and who had gone from like yoga is this out there woo-woo thing, and if someone asked you on the plane, what do you do, and you said I'm a yoga teacher, they were like, oh. Now they're like, oh, I love yoga, if you say that. So I sort of have watched it go from this really fringe thing to this really mainstream thing. And even when it became mainstream, I think it was still quite traditional, as I said, because these teachers were still sort of the ones that were imparting the knowledge. And in the last few years, it has become, so different to me. Like it's less, there's less, it seems, curiosity about the larger teachings of yoga, the more vast teachings of yoga, and much more focus on pose. And it seems like we've gone from, well, we're doing asana to get to, to get to that meditation goal. Like asana was always meant to be this thing that got your body prepared for meditation. But now it's almost like the meditation piece is out, and it's like, how many poses can we actually do and get good at, and this and that. And less interest in chanting, less interest in meditation or pranayama, or the sort of slower things. And also like how an asana, within an asana, you could actually have a moment of enlightenment, even with asana. So it's just become very physical. Like people aren't oming, people aren't using Sanskrit. So I've noticed that, And I don't have any judgment around that. I don't, it's just interesting to me, but I also see that the curiosity is coming back, and that we've taken a turn. Like, it's like we went in this direction, and then it's like people are like, wait a minute, now that I've achieved all these poses, like there must be more. And now they're coming back, and there's a deeper curiosity. So that's been very lovely for me, because when people are curious, I get excited. I've got things I can share, so it's, and I've found Seattle to be extremely curious. And the students are very, they're awake, they want to know. And that's been really lovely, particularly all over the Pacific Northwest, up into Canada too. I've seen that really great curiosity. It's more than just, flowing and breathing and sweating and doing asana, which is great. I mean, I love that stuff. But, there's more. And so, like, do both.